Was the Bible changed? This is a question that I used to ask myself as a Muslim, someone who thought that the Bible had been retranslated and translated and then submitted and changed either by accident or on purpose a bunch of different times. Now, there are two ways actually to respond to this question. One is historical and the other one is theological, and I'm going to get to both if you don't mind. The first one is historical. What we have in the Old Testament and the New Testament is what one scholar called an embarrassment of riches. We have so many manuscripts, ancient manuscripts of both the Old and New Testaments that nothing else quite compares, especially when it comes to the New Testament. We have 5,000 or so copies of the New Testament in Greek, both in fragmentary and in whole book forms. We have more than 24,000, close to 25,000 copies of the New Testament in fragmentary and in whole book forms in Greek and other languages like Coptic and Syriac and these kinds of things in Greek and all kinds of languages. And many of them date back pretty early. Some are relatively recent. A lot go back really early. And what you'll notice when you look at the traditions on these things, when you look at the families of manuscripts from early on in the New Testament, for example, what you'll find is that the oldest manuscripts, the earliest ones that are written, match up very, very well with the more recent manuscripts. And that's pretty remarkable because that's not common in ancient texts, especially when you have this many different manuscripts. In fact, let me give you an example. The Gospel of John is often thought to be the last gospel written, the latest gospel written. And for a long time, a lot of scholars would tell you the Gospel of John was written late 2nd century, maybe even in the 3rd century at best, and it has lots of legendary embellishment in it. Well, they found one little postage stamp sized piece of the Gospel of John. It's called the John Rylands Papyrus, P52 it's called. And it's about a postage stamp size, and it's got parts of the Gospel of John, chapter 18 in it. Wow. And it's really recounting the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. And when they dated this, scholars have dated this papyrus. This is a copy of a copy of a copy. Okay, so the original is even older. They've dated this little piece of papyrus between 95 AD and 150 AD, maybe a little bit older than that. That's late 1st century or mid 2nd century. That is unbelievably early when it comes to ancient manuscripts. Nothing really has that kind of a comparison in terms of the reliability and the earliness of such a late manuscript, which shows you that the Bible was actually written far earlier than the 2nd century or whatever it is, and doesn't contain legendary embellishments. The Old Testament has some really great stuff as well. So for example, we base our current Old Testament translations on what's called the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is a text of the Old Testament dating to 900 AD. Now, you might think in 900 AD, that's 900 years after Jesus, but the Old Testament is before Jesus. How can we trust anything that it says? The more we look into the sands of the Middle East, what we find, for example, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, are documents that corroborate the Masoretic text. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, corroborate very well the Masoretic text. In fact, in a recent find in En-Gedi, there was a 2,000-year-old manuscript that was burned so badly that it couldn't be unrolled to read it, but they could virtually unroll it with laser technology and scanning technology. And when they unrolled it, they found a passage from Leviticus that is identical, 900 years before the Masoretic text, to the Masoretic text. So every time we look, we find that there's tons of archaeological reasons historically to believe the Bible has not been changed. But let me get to the theological response now. Now, this is for those who already believe in God, who believe in a God. Perhaps you're a Muslim, perhaps you're a Christian, whatever it might be, and you believe that God is the greatest possible being. I believed that as a Muslim. Allahu Akbar, there can be no being greater than God. Well, if that's true, then God would have to have two necessary properties for him to be truly great. He'd have to be all-powerful, and he'd have to be trustworthy. If he's not all-powerful, then he's like Zeus or Hermes or Aphrodite. Who cares? It's not really a real God in that sense. If he's not trustworthy, then he can lie to you, and how would you know? And if he's not trustworthy and he says he can preserve the Bible or the Quran or whatever documents you're talking about, why would you believe him if he's not trustworthy? Maybe he's not. So here's the thing. If God is all-powerful and trustworthy, then this is what has to follow. If the Bible was changed, and it was once God's revealed word, as for example the Quran would say, and God couldn't protect it, then he's not all-powerful. And if he's not all powerful, then he's not great. But option B is that God could have protected it, but chose not to protect it. And if he chose not to protect it, then he's not trustworthy. And if he's not trustworthy, then he's not great. So if he couldn't protect it, or if he wouldn't protect it, he's not a God worth you believing in. But the record shows, and I think the character of God shows, that God could, God would, and history shows that God did preserve his word.